Hey everybody, Ben here for the Bonehead podcast, and welcome to Print to Pitch. This is where we have a look at all things 3D printed for Blood Bowl. Whether it's full-on teams, star players, big guys, monsters, accessories, or things that have no right being involved with Blood Bowl but work really well for Blood Bowl, we take a bit of a deep dive and really just have a look at what's out there and really advise you on what's good and what's not. So it's the beginning of the month, which means it's time for Patreons. And now we've got a heck of a Chaos Dwarf team from Torchlight. You guys know I love the Torchlight releases. Recently, their Goblin and Orc team have just been some of my favourite 3D printed models out there. And now they've done Chaos Dwarf. So we are going to have a look at the release Furnace of Pain for this month. Now the cool thing about the way they do this is if you join their tribe or their Patreon, you'll get this team. If you want to buy it later on, it'll be about $20, $30. But you get a full-on whack of a team. So what we're going to have a look is what's involved in the team, have a look at the STLs, and then have a look at some of the awesome prints. Okay, so first things first, I've had a horrible time with the printer recently. Basically, the FEP split and I poured resin onto my screen and couldn't fix it. So I had to wait a few days for a replacement screen to arrive. So the models are not as well cleaned up as they would normally be because I got these printed really quickly so that I could show them off ready for the beginning of the month for this release. That doesn't affect the quality of the sculpts though, which is pretty cool. So this month we've got a Chaos Dwarf team from Torchlight. They have got a massive Minotaur, and this is a chunky boy of a model, which is very cool. But hey, it's Chaos Dwarves. We've got a bunch of different hobgoblins. I think we've got 6 different hobgoblins, and we've got 6 different Chaos Dwarves as well. But you get alternate sculpts for every one of those Chaos Dwarves, between the old bucket hats and like a standard Chaos hat as well. The same is true of the Bull Centaurs, which are some of the best Bull Centaurs I've seen for a long time. That guy top left just looks like the old star player Bull Centaur from 3rd edition, so absolutely Torchlight have nailed it this month. I was super happy with the way the Bull Centaurs look. And again, they've got the bucket hats and they've got Chaos hats as well, and we've printed off a selection of each to kind of show off those models. So even though you get 6 Chaos Dwarves and 6 Hobgoblins, you get 6 Hobgoblins, 12 different Chaos Dwarves basically, 4 different Bull Centaurs, and a very big Minotaur. So I tell you what, let's have a look at some of the sculpts. Okay, so here we've got some of the Chaos Dwarves. Now what I wanted to show is the different sculpts with the different style of hats. I think it's pretty clear to see. So action pose, sculpting wise, you've got all the classic Chaos Dwarf bits and bobs, right? We've got Torchlight faces, which is slightly over-exaggerated. It lines up nicely with their Dwarf release, although it's a little bit more toned down. They've got the big jaws with the big teeth. They look very much like the cover of the Chaos Dwarf army book from Warhammer 4th edition, like with the flames and the bull. This is just proper old school Warhammer fantasy. And you've got the 2 different style of hats, which I absolutely love as a choice. As you've got the left hand side here where you've got the bucket hats, right? You've got the classic Chaos Dwarf look. You've got all the great sculpts. You've got the beautiful detail on the beard. You've got great face detail. They're going to paint up lovely. You've got a nice bit of skull detail, the armor. You've got the dents on the armor. You've got all the detail that you kind of get, which is normal for Torchlight. And then you've got these very cool hats. So on the left hand side, you've got the old school buckets, right? This is just absolute Chaos Dwarf. But they've also got an alternative sculpt for each of the Chaos Dwarves with basically just a Chaos hat, a Dwarf hat, like a Viking. I know Vikings didn't have helmets on their hats, but you know, Viking style helmet there that's just kind of playable as well. The cool thing is that these guys will be able to function as dwarves in your OWA team and basically doing whatever you want, because the guys on the right, in fact, they've got no Chaos heraldry on them, so you can use them for whatever. So really like this. They're great sculpts. They are squat, they are exaggerated, but they are absolutely retro. Okay, so the star players for Chaos Dwarves, they're not the Chaos Dwarves, they're not the Hobgoblins, they're the Bull Centaurs. These strength 4 mad lads are just some of the most exciting players out there. Big fan of strength 4 players with a bit of movement, and actually Bull Centaurs pretty much fit that nicely. So again, what I've done here is I've taken both the sculpts that are available, and I've taken one with the old bucket hat and one with, have I done that? Yeah, one with the kind of Viking helmet there. And you can see there's differences in the sculpts. They've both got the beards, they've both got the beard braids, they've both got the kind of Torchlight dwarf face with the Chaos Dwarf hooked nose, and you've got tons of detail on the armor. Now, these are big models, but because the way they're designed, they kind of rock back on the base, so they work really, really well for Blood Bowl. We'll have a look at the 3D print in a second, but you can see they've got a ton of dynamism in the sculpts, but this is just pure Chaos Dwarf. Like, when Games Workshop re-released this team, if it's not like this, I think we're all going to be super disappointed. So what Torchlight have done, have captured the aesthetic exactly as you'd expect, I guess, from Chaos Dwarves. Anyway, tons of detail. It's a difficult model to kind of build. The bull centaurs are challenging because they are horse-sized, right? They're bull-sized. So the old school Warhammer stuff, they fit on a 50 by 25 mil base, which is not suitable for Blood Bowl. So trying to capture a model that is that size with that power, they've done a very good job of capturing that. And onward to the least interesting but woefully underrated part of the Chaos Dwarf team, the hobgoblins. So what we've got here, they've gone with this kind of goblin but bigger. They've done a really good job. Now, the funny thing about these hobgoblins is they're kind of ripped. They've got plenty of muscle definition, but then you've got the exaggerated goblin faces, you've got the warts on the noses, and you've got a reasonable amount of armor. Now, hobgoblins are strength 3, they're nothing special, they're armor 8+. And actually, the way these models are sculpted, they've got some of the armor, the rest of them are kind of underclothed, they're dressed in rags, enough there to get your color scheme in, but without them actually appearing to be too tough. So I like it. Good job. The cowls on the head allow you to get the team colors in there as well. They look like halfway between goblins and men, which is basically where the hobgoblin positional fits. But if you are playing a Chaos Dwarf team, regardless of whether you are a hardline no Minotaur fan or a hardline Minotaur fan, the fact is that this team is one of the best teams in Blood Bowl because it does have access to one of the biggest and best big guys in Blood Bowl, and we've got this very cool Minotaur. So it's a weird one. It's got all the standard Minotaur bits, right? You've got the horns, but they've done a really clever thing. They've tied the beard braids and the kind of facial structure in with the dwarf team, so it doesn't look too bestial. They've kind of given it more of a humane feature to it, and they've tied the kind of the shaggy hair and the braided beard into the rest of the style of the Chaos Dwarf. You got the same kind of armor, the same kind of rags as the hobgoblins. They've done a really good job tying that in. But there's some cool stuff on this guy as well. So because it's like an enslaved, mutated Minotaur, you've got these cool, like, crystals growing out the side of it, which is going to give you a nice bit of kind of painting opportunity as well. Yeah, it's got some good crags and rocks. Now, I love this. There's a ton of muscle definition, so this model is going to paint up really nicely. But like, you've got a ton of just very simple detail around the back, which means it's going to paint up easily. But when you look at the face and the area that matters, it's packed in, and you're going to have a real good pop of a face with some contrast paints or a bit of a wash, which is really where we want to be for Blood Bowl. And you've got the shards of this armor, the shards of the rock there popping out from his hand as well. It's an interesting design. It's not full classic Minotaur, but it works really well for this team. Okay, so on to the models themselves. So I have had a few prints of these, and I guess the first thing to call out is that the scaling for these models, you are gonna have to tweak to your kind of preference. So I've printed some stuff off at 100% and 110% and 120%. So this is one of the Chaos Dwarves printed at 100%. Now, like I said, I haven't cleaned these up as well as I should have done because I wanted to kind of rush them to get to the video, but you can see there's a ton of detail on there that have come out really nicely. And as far as like support marks and stuff, there's not a huge amount. Like I said, I've not cleaned it up brilliantly, but you kind of get that Chaos Dwarf vibe really, really nicely. The downside of 100% scale, let's grab my human strength 3 comparison piece here, one of the throwers from the Imperial Nobility. 100% scale for the dwarf is flipping tiny. This is small. Far too small at 100%. So if you are going to be doing your Chaos Dwarves, you are going to need to scale them up. Now, it's fine, but to line up with Games Workshop in the 2020 setting, that's halfling sized. You need to boost it up a bit. So we've got 110% here. I've got two models here with 110%. Let's use the bucket hat, because the bucket hat is just a great piece of style. That's probably not too bad at 110%. It lines up all right because he's got a tall hat. Now, if he doesn't have a tall hat, it is, again, a little bit on the short side. He's got plenty of mass at 110%, so actually, that's fine too. But you can see tons of detail there. It's shiny because a lot of these I only gave one rinse with. Again, that's my bad. Don't do that. Rinse twice, clean, remove your supports, be good. Leave it to dry naturally. Don't just, you know, grab it out of a tin and chuck it under the lights. So, cool design. Great hats. And look at the, like, I love this model. The posing is brilliant. The action is brilliant. It just looks literally like the front cover of an old school Warhammer rulebook. 110% is okay. But I do think for the Chaos Dwarves, 120% is kind of where you want to be. And if we line it up to a human, you see that they are still shorter, but from a mass point of view, they've got that presence. In fact, 120% might be a little bit too big, but actually, you know me, I like my models to be big. It makes it easier to paint, it makes them easier to see. And from a height point of view, 120% is good, and they aren't massively like over presenced, if that makes any sense. So we got 320% here. So I wanted to kind of get a good breakdown of the model sizes. I actually don't know if I like the bucket hats or the alternative helmets better. I'm not sure which. I actually like the size of both. Now, what we do have is a Black Orc here, because I wanted to represent this 120% scale nicely. So Black Orc, strength 4, 120% dwarf with a bucket helmet, shorter than a Black Orc, less size than a Black Orc, because what you don't want to do is print your models to be so big that they look strength 4. But actually, 110%, 120%, there's not a huge amount in it. Actually, I like the 120 because it's going to be able to, you're going to be able to get more detail on there, and they're going to print up and just look really, really, really sharp. So the models, the sculpts, absolutely awesome. Like, I love the movement in them. They're not like modern models. They have got this absolute 3rd edition 1995 everything's red kind of vibe, and that genuinely couldn't make me happier. So 120%, 110% is okay, 120% is where I want to be, 110, 115 is probably the right point. Okay, then we've got the hobgoblins here. So this is one sculpt at 100% scale. This is less small than the 100% dwarf. Okay, so if we take our little tiny dwarf at 100% and compare it to the hobgoblin has got height, head and shoulders above the dwarf, which kind of makes sense. So 100% scale is okay for the hobgoblins, but when you line them up to a human, they are quite small. The 100% scale of hobgoblin is going to get you essentially kind of goblin mass, okay? It's going to give you a goblin-sized model, and these guys at 100% are going to blend in really well with the Torchlight goblin team. So if you want to flesh out your goblins, or maybe use goblins for your underworld team or something like that, then these guys at 100% scale will fit in perfectly. Naturally, I've boosted them up to 110 as well, so I like this much better. I think 110 is where you want to be for hobgoblins. You can see that I even just quick print with my Mars 2 Pro, standard resin, standard settings. You get all the detail that you need on these models. Like, this is just excellent. I am so happy that we have the ability to just 3D print stuff like this. And when we do a size comparison to a strength 3 human thrower, 110% is probably about right. Maybe a little large, I don't know. Actually, I think that might just be that one sculpt. When you line them up to the thrower there, then yeah, 110% for the hobgoblins. I do also have 120%, but I think you'll agree that's probably a little bit too big. So 110% for the hobgoblins is where you want to be, and it lines up nicely to 120% with the Chaos Dwarves. And we've got a bull centaur. So, full disclosure, I've not cleaned this up as well as I should have, so it looks a little bit too shiny, and I also broke the flipping tail off. But for the purposes of looking at the models right now, that doesn't matter too much. Look at this. This is such a cool sculpt. Bull centaurs are where it's at, and you get all the detail here. So, we've already looked at the Chaos Dwarves, and we've decided that they want to be 115, 120%, right? And the hobgoblins need to be 110%. This is 100%. And when I compare it to 120% dwarf, it's fine. When you compare it to 110% dwarf, it's fine. So actually this guy, his body is about 110%, so they are size boosted. Now, it is a chonky model, okay? So first of all, it will fit on a 32mm base, and you can see how this is going to work. You have to kind of position it towards the back. You can even chuck it on a 40 actually, and it's going to be rearing up, and you're going to have that tube effect that's going to work. But size-wise, absolutely stonking huge. This is 100% scale, and the dwarf is 110% kind of lining up with the standard dwarves. And when you line it up to a human, this is absolutely massive. But because the model is rearing up, it just works. And I really wouldn't want to fudge around with the scale too much. Bull centaurs are big models. They are supposed to be big players. They are supposed to have a big amount of presence. You're going to have two of them on the pitch, because you're going to have two of them on the pitch. And when they are on the base, it's not absolutely massive. It looks massive when you line them up, but if they're just glued down, if they're just side by side on the pitch, they're head and shoulders above, but it actually works fine. So 100% scale for the bull centaur is definitely fine, and I'm going to print these out again properly and give them a nice clean up as they should. It's just so funny to look at the height difference compared to a human and just see how big it is. And this is a full-on like horse body. I know it's supposed to be a bull, but full-on horse body. Here we go. So Black Orc versus Bull Centaur. The body mass is about right, but let's face it, this is half cavalry and it is sized to represent it. 100% is fine for the Bull Centaurs. Because of the way they stick on the base, you're good to go. Which brings us to the big boy. Now I've printed the Minotaur off at 100%, and all that detail we looked at can be picked up. Again, I've not cleaned this up as well as I should have done because, well, I had to print several different sizes. But you can see all the detail there on the model that we kind of had a look at from the STL. It's there. Quite frankly, brown spray, some colours chucked on top, and it's going to be absolutely good to go. Is that hair or I? No, that's just a hair. Okay, that's fine. I thought maybe I'd cracked the resin. But the model is awesome. I love the pose. I love the size. You can see the legs have got this kind of exaggerated hoof point that really lines up with the corn gauze. So if you're looking for a Minotaur for a Chaos team and you're using some of the corn gauze from the corn team, this guy's going to line up nicely. And if you want an alternative sculpt to be your Bloodspawn, this will be just fine. And this is where Torchlight are building such a big menu of players that you can build and print a team very, very easily. So 100% scale. Let's grab our trusty strength 5 piece, which is the ogre from Dungeon Bowl. This dude is massive. I actually think it's fine. He's just about sized okay, so it'll be okay in Blood Bowl. But compared to a strength 5, compared to the ogre, he is absolutely flipping huge. Now, luckily, we're on a 40mm base. He will be just fine. But trying to squeeze him onto a 32 is not going to happen. You will have to downsize him if you want to. 90% is probably okay. Now, I'm a big fan of big guys, so this is our Blood Bowl ogre. And when you line up the Minotaur to old Boney, actually, the Minotaur is bigger, but actually Boney is a big old boy. So putting him on a 40mm base is going to be fine. So the Minotaur is going to need either scaling down to 90%, which I wouldn't necessarily want to do with all the hair pieces there. I'm actually fine just slapping him on a 40 and running him on the pitch. And I guess if we do a size comparison here, you've got human strength 3, Boney is a big ogre, and then you compare him to the Minotaur here, and the Minotaur is monstrous. Now, 90%, fine. 100% is fine. But I'm thinking 150%, 200%, and we've got a Chaos Giant. And this would be a heck of a serious piece, right? A heck of a serious model. If it was this big, this chunky, upscaled the Corn player to be a giant just because I could. Actually, this is probably the next model that I will upscale to be a giant for one of these teams because it's so good. And there you have it, a very cool Chaos Dwarf team. You've got to be careful of the scaling. Remember, 110, 120% for the Chaos Dwarves, 110% for the Hobgoblins, 100% for the Minotaur and the Bull Centaurs. But if you look at the style and you want this classic 3rd, 4th edition Warhammer style Chaos Dwarf team with the kind of cartoony aesthetic that Torchlight brings that really lines up nicely with it, then you are going to be very happy with this Chaos Dwarf team. We've seen a couple of really good Chaos Dwarf teams land recently. The Grebo one is exceptional. Now we've got an excellent STL available here. This is legitimately the golden age of Blood Bowl. Anyway, let me know what you think of this team in the comments. Big fan of Torchlight and what they're doing, so I look forward to next month's. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. We'll be back soon with more Blood Bowl content. Happy printing. Thanks very much for watching. We really appreciate your support. If you want to help support the channel even further, please like and subscribe, or come join us on our Patreon. We have early access to content. We get loads of feedback from you guys, and we try and do competitions as much as we can. Or you can get yourself some Bonehead podcast merch on our Spreadshirt site. So if you want to support a team, especially for the Bonehead Championship, you can pick up a shirt, a mug, things like that. It all helps support the channel, and we really appreciate it. Anyway, links below. Thank you very much. Happy blocking.